Welcome to everybody. My name is Danielle Kashubi, and I'm the president of the Western Bird Banding Association. I'm going to share my screen so you got to see my face for a few moments there. But these webinars are part of the Western Bird Banding Association's webinar series. We try and do this once a year because we don't all get together and hear about what everybody's doing. We can't go to all the meetings. So this is our way of reaching out and hearing what everybody is doing. I'm looking forward to tonight's webinars, but we will be having webinars for a few more months. We're just doing them once a month. Next month, I am going to do a WRP on plumage workshop, and that'll be on February 11th. If you attend this webinar, I will send out the registration information for that, so you'll get to join that if you'd like to. We will have in March presentations by our Western Bird Banding Grant Award recipients, Lauren Hill and Alex Belladron, on their research. And then in April, we're going to have a presentation about barred owls and spotted owls by VTech. And I'm not going to try and pronounce his last name till I talk to him in person, but he's going to do that and in April and give us that presentation. So look in your email and social media for dates and Zoom links as we confirm those. These webinar series, the idea is that these support WBBA's grant program. We're proud of how these webinars build our community and share information. So if you want to consider donating to WBBA's grant program and support banders that are doing research and monitoring, and if you know somebody who needs a grant, tell them to apply. The information is on our website. This just takes you to the donation page, these QR code and that link. I'll bring them up again at the end so people can reach out if they want to. But if someone does need a grant for the research program, please tell them to apply. We do try and support research. We give out up to two $1,000 grants per year. And if we get enough support, we can do two $1,000 grants for people who are doing this research, especially people in early careers. This is really helpful. Mike Stewart is going to take over. Mike is also a Texan, so we have talks from Texas today. So Mike's interest in birds began in 2002 when a pair of blue jays nested outside his kitchen window, leading to 20 years of birding across the eastern U.S. and Texas. After retiring from the Army in 2019, Mike pursued his passion for ornithology at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, where he completed his master's in biology studying gray hawks. He lives in Alice, Texas with his wife Yvette and their green-cheeked conure, Conley, who was around, but I don't see at the moment. Oh, there he is behind your head. In January 2022, Mike began his PhD studies at Texas A&M University Kingsville, where his current research focuses on gray hawk habitat selection, range establishment, population growth rates, and identifying additional suitable areas. So it's nice to have I love a passerine, but it's nice to, expand our horizons and listen to what Mike has to say. It's all yours.
All right, thank you very much, Danny. Get this thing going here. So I have been studying gray hawks since the end of 2019 when I retired from the Army, started at University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, where I was looking at adult home range size and also juvenile movements after they left the natal area. Now I am at Kingsville working with my advisor, Ashley Tanner. Dr. Aditya Singh is a GIS genius. He's very helpful with a lot of what I've done. And I've also been working with Bill Clark and Brian Millsap, who've helped tremendously. So I wanted to go over quite a few things that I've been able to do with movement data to show some of what's possible for people that might not have the luxury of working with a bird heavy enough to take a transmitter. This is a map showing the study area where most of the captures have taken place in South Texas, Cameron County to the east, Hidalgo County to the west. This is an area where over 95% of the vegetation's been lost. And sorry, it's moving the thing around. The blue areas on here is mostly the Lower Rio Grande Valley National Wildlife Refuge. Santa Ana Wildlife Refuge is also on here. And a lot of the native vegetation that's remaining is in some of these tracts, a lot of it down by the river. Also, when I started, there's not much known about grayhawks. There still isn't. Most of what's published comes from southern Arizona, and in Texas, they are a state-listed species. So I've covered when I began. All of the birds that we've captured are getting color banded. That's 288 birds as of this January. 14 of those have been outside the lower Rio Grande Valley. Two of them have been up the river in Laredo, Texas, and then 12 of them have been in southern Arizona. And I've had 44 GPS GSM transmitters and been able to deploy those on 76 birds. Some of the transmitters get reused. I've had birds drop transmitters and we've been able to recover and redeploy those. And then I've also had some mortalities and been able to recover those transmitters. And then I've also had 20 VHF transmitters that, as part of the master's research, I deployed on mostly adults. There were two birds that were second cycle females that were paired with an adult, so I felt pretty confident that they were going to stay put in the area where I deployed the transmitter. And for anyone that doesn't know, I'm sure everyone knows GPS is the global positioning system satellites that get the fixes. And then GSM is global system for mobile communications. So that's just the cell network. And these things aren't tied to any particular provider like AT&T or Verizon. And also they're not tied to, US and I have to pay extra for Mexico, anything like that. As long as they hit a cell tower, they should work. Got quite a few trapping methods available other than just mist nets. On the top left, you can see me climbing a tree, which is a easy way to get bands on birds, but not very fun for me because I'm not a fan of heights. When I would do this, I would climb to the nest and then lower the chicks to the ground so that people assisting me could band them down there where I felt it would be much safer than me trying to do it in the air at the nest. Doe Gaza, pictured here, is similar to a mist net, but it doesn't have the pockets that a bird would hit the net and fall down into. It's just a flat piece of netting. And the bird hits and gets enveloped in there, really one of three ways. Either the whole thing would fall over, the poles would fall over, or the top would detach and the net could slide down the poles, or the net could detach completely and, wrap the bird up as it flies through, in each instance going after a lure bird that's pictured there. Bottom left also uses a lure bird, a fly trap. That's going to be something more useful for falcons or Coopers or sharp-shinned hawk that wants to come and grab a bird as it's flying. And no matter which direction they come from, as they extend their talons to grab the bird, they should hit a noose and get caught. Top right is an illustration showing a bow net actuating. It's got springs. When you trigger it, it flips the net over the bird. This is halfway closed, going over the raptor that's on top of the lure bird, centered in the net. And then these other two illustrations down here are different variations of a ball chatri, flat trap, and a conical one. Um, the bottom right is like a dome balchetry. They could be different shapes and sizes. It's a trap from India, very old type of trap where they've been doing falconry for centuries. And it's essentially a cage with a critter in there they think they can get. They'll come and they'll try and grab it, and then they get noosed. Originally, it was like a bamboo cage with a bird, and the nooses were horse's hair, like the mane or tail. Now it's typically half-inch hardware cloth and fishing line. A lot of the time, 30-pound test fishing line. So, and this is a juvenile female greyhawk that's there staring at the tasty mouse. And then you can also use mist nets, but it is not very effective unless you have a way to entice them in there. So once a raptor has young in the nest, they usually get extremely aggressive defending that. And so this one's not a greyhawk, this is a Cooper's hawk, but you can have a great horned owl near the nest. They will come and they'll try and drive it off. And as they fly down to dive bomb it, in this case, the live owl will duck out of the way and hit the mist net. This is Cooper's hawk my friend Brian works with. He's got a non-releasable great horned owl he works with 2 or 3 weeks a year. The far right is what I have. I had to get a separate permit from Fish and Wildlife, a salvage permit that allows me to possess a taxidermied great horned owl. And this went to a taxidermist in Idaho that took radio control car parts, put them in there so that when I turn the steering wheel on the remote, the owl's head will turn and its wings also move just a tiny bit to make it more lifelike. So once I get a raptor, unlike songbirds, where I am much more careful about not hurting them. With raptors, I'm much more careful with them not hurting me. You can see this picture up in the top, almost center, the size of the talons on some of them. So a lot of what I do is with the bird in a tube. It keeps them calm and restricted, safer for them and me both. I use cardboard shipping tubes. They're very sturdy and there's no rough edges. Some people will tape a couple of Folgers cans together or use Pringles can, orange juice can, different sizes depending on the Raptor. I really like these. In every instance, it's got one end that's closed with a bunch of air holes in there for ventilation. You are all familiar, I'm sure, butt-end bands there, down there in the bottom left. The lock-on bands have two flanges, one longer than the other, so that you have this tab that folds over to lock it on. And that's done just with a pair of slip joint pliers up here in the top left. I'm folding the tab over. The color band in the bottom, almost center, has two flanges, but instead of locking on, it has two holes for pop rivets, which is what's through there. And then this is showing just using a pop rivet gun to fasten that band on its leg, measuring the longest rectrices and measuring the helix claw, which no different than what you would do for songbirds. For measuring them, I do the same thing I do with songbird banding. I'm lazy and I don't like doing math, so I put them on the scale in the tube in this case, or in the bag for songbirds, tear it, set everything to 0, and then once the bird comes out and I put the bag or can back on there, the negative weight that it displays is the weight of the hawk that's missing from the tube. And I like to leave them upside down on their head for as little time as possible. So I imagine it's pretty uncomfortable. And I like to keep a hand right by the tube just in case it tips, which has never happened, but better safe than sorry. Wing cord, same measurement, just a much longer wing rule. And this one's sitting on the rear bumper of the car. And then measure the culmen from the cere. With those measurements, a lot of raptors that you can't sex by plumage, you're able to sex using these measurements, unless it's something that's very widespread with a lot of overlap, like a red-tailed hawk or red-shouldered hawk. Gray hawks make it even easier because I only need to gauge the leg and get the mass. There's no overlap in mass between them, so it's very easy to tell males from females. And then for deploying transmitters, there's different methods you could do it, attaching them to a leg or tail feathers. I'm using backpack type harnesses, which is just like it sounds. There's two loops that, each wing goes through a loop and that wears the transmitter on its back like a little backpack, pictured here. And I started out using Teflon ribbon, which is very common. And I guess a lot of raptors are well behaved and they don't mess with it, but the gray hawks started chewing through this about as soon as I put it on them. So that's why I had birds dropping transmitters. And I switched to this white material that's in the center picture called Spectra. And it's manufactured by Bally Ribbon Mills in Kentucky, which I think is where most people purchase Teflon ribbon. You can get it the same thickness. It's just as light as Teflon. It doesn't cost any more, but it is quite a bit stronger. And it also tends to absorb glue much better. And that's what I'm doing in the bottom left picture. Initially, after I would fit the transmitter, and you want it so that you can stick a finger under the transmitter easily to make sure it's not too tight or too loose. When I would get it fit as tight as it needed to be and with the harness material routed where it should be, not twisted or anything, then tie off the knots, cut the excess, and I was just gluing the knots. What I started doing after that was stitching through the knots and then gluing them, and that has worked much better. And I also switched brands of super glue, and I'm using crazy glue, which seems to really penetrate well. And no matter the type of glue, though, the fumes really irritate their eyes. So that's why in the bottom left, the bird's head is covered to protect their eyes from the fumes. And I've got business cards under there so that I'm gluing harness material and not gluing feathers. And then with these, you can program the collection schedule. and also when it transmits. So for instance, as long as the batteries on my transmitters are above 75% charged, they're collecting fixes every 30 minutes. If it drops below 75, it'll go to an hour. If it drops below 50, it'll go to 2 hours. And you can program that for whatever you want. And then I also have them programmed so that they're transmitting about once every 5 days through the cell network. So this is a map from the manufacturer. These transmitters are made by Ornitella in Lithuania. And this is a screenshot from their website showing 4 different birds in Benson State Park and the surrounding fish and wildlife tracks. And you can see with the adults, there's very little overlap. There's just a few exploratory movements that go just into the neighbor's territory. When I started this, there were year-round sightings of grayhawks in the valley, but they didn't know if it were the same birds staying the same places all year. And I was able to confirm that pairs do stay together in their territories year-round. The home range analysis I did used a different method than what is shown here. It's one that really wasn't the best choice for raptors that stay in the same place for a very long time. I used Browning Bridge movement method. What's shown here, this is a pair of hawks in Arizona. The map is, the picture is actually Texas, but the male is blue, the yellow fixes and the red utilization distribution is the female. And this is a different method called autocorrelated kernel density estimator, which for these type of transmitters, I mean, you really have to completely forget about simple methods like minimum convex polygon or just a regular kernel density estimator. It collects fixes so close in time to each other. And then in this case, they're also spatially very close to each other. So the locations are autocorrelated. You can't assume that one location is independent from another, and you need a method that will handle that. With the juveniles, there are people that do put transmitters on nestlings when they're close to fledging. This is my first go putting transmitters on anything, and I didn't want to guess how much room I needed to leave for them to still bulk up and put on some more muscle. So I just color banded in the nest so I would know exactly where the bird started from if I caught them months later. But when they got to be about 2 weeks out of the nest, like the bird pictured here, they were typically hunting on their own, and we really didn't have much trouble catching 14 juveniles with balsha trees before they ever left their natal area. This is showing what one male did after he left the nest tree, which is the green triangle on the far left here. And he moved over to the more wooded area and hung out there until he initiated dispersal. And that's one of the things I looked at from the masters is when did they initiate dispersal? When did they settle for the winter? How large was the area where they spent the winter? And then when did they start moving again in the spring? And this picture here is this same male. This is his movements. I came across him in the winter, and you can really not even see the transmitter on his back in this photo, which is why in one of the photos I forgot to mention, most of the models that I have use an elevated solar panel, which really helps keep them from covering them up. And this is also a bird that has more extensive preformative molt than most of them, with all these gray nape feathers. Most of them we wouldn't see any gray, but some of them that we caught would have some scattered gray feathers here and there. So if I were only color banding birds, this map, this would be all that I would know, where they started and then where they ended up breeding. So the masters looked at what I described for start and stop times for movement, but I've been tracking some of them long enough that I've documented natal dispersal for 5 females that have survived and established their own breeding territories. And for this one female, Orange 1/C, that's all I do know is where her natal area and her breeding territory, because she had a color band only. These other 4 had GPS GSM transmitters, so I'm able to tell everything that they did in between, which is very useful for conservation. I don't just have her parents' breeding territory and her breeding territory, and that's all that we know about to protect. We know about all these other stopover sites she used where she wintered, and got some really valuable information, I think. And then another thing I learned with this is that all five of the females selected breeding territories that were similar land cover types to their natal area. So if they came from an urban area, that's where they settled to breed. And if they came from a more natural area, that's where they ended up establishing territory. Most of the juveniles just wandered around the valley, like the what you saw on that last slide. But I did have four of the 14 that had some big movements that looked like migration. These three that went down to Central America, they left in October, which coincides with fall migration for the Arizona birds. The yellow one, she was a little bit later. She waited until December. The two males went to Nicaragua and Honduras. Shortly after arriving, they stopped transmitting and presumably dead. The orange track is a female that went and wintered in El Salvador, and she returned in April, which coincides with spring migration. And then the yellow track, she wintered in Tampico, Mexico, which is ridiculously urban if you look at that in satellite imagery. And then she returned in April. And with the birds that did this and survived to second winter or longer, the orange one, she's still alive. They only did this their first winter. All of their subsequent winters, they've stayed in the valley and you become residents. So it's like some kind of weird partial migration that a few of the birds have done. I've had a couple opportunities to do some opportunistic stuff, and this is one of them where I had a adult female with a transmitter, caught her out here along the edge of the Business 83, and she spent most of her time in this woodlot. And you can see this pictures from August 10th, and then by the 28th, not even a month later, this plot of land was sold. New landowner apparently hated trees because they cleared damn near every tree on there. All of those in the north, that's a separate plot of land that a different landowner owns, which has since this also been cleared. But I wanted to use the movement data to try and look at her behavior and see how that affected her. I supposed that after this, she would spend more time in exploratory movements looking for a new territory. So I used a hidden Markov model, which I used a two-state model. I essentially told it, I want you to group movements into two states. And with two fixes from one point to the next, you have a step length. If you have three fixes, and you get a turning angle between them. And so what it did is it looked at all the movements in any short steps with frequent changes in direction. It put those in one state that are going to be these within patch movements. And then longer steps with a more persistent heading are going to be in an exploratory state. So in the bottom right, you can see that what I thought would happen did not. The activity budget was almost identical between the two states, but what she ended up doing is making much longer exploratory movements. The yellow polygon in the center completely encompasses all of her locations for the several months before this happened. And then the cutout of roads is encompassing all of her movements afterwards. And the maximum exploratory movement before was 2 kilometers. Uh, that was the only one over 1.5. There were only a few around 1.5, 1 kilometer. She stayed pretty close to those trees. Afterwards, the max was 13.5 kilometers from the center. Bunch of movements over 10 kilometers, and you can see going back and forth east to west. So one thing I also did with this is quantify one risk that she would face in this larger area, which was roads. And she went from being exposed to 7 kilometers of roads within that little yellow polygon to 547, which along with roads, most of them have phone lines, power lines. So you've got increased risk of collision by vehicles, by power lines, electrocution, not to mention all the other stuff that she would be exposed to. This is a male in Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge, another opportunistic thing where had a bird with a transmitter and they had a wildfire. I didn't have enough fixes to use a hidden Markov model to look at behavioral states with this one, so I looked at home ranges using the autocorrelated kernel density estimator and looked at a month prior to the wildfire, during the fire, and then a month after to see if he shifted. I thought that he would shift out of this area, at least temporarily. But with the overlap in this, he did not. There was no significant shift when the fire was going on or after the area had been burned. So, a couple neat things I was able to do. Both of them are just a sample size of one, but something I still found interesting and documented. This slide is a bit of a mess. This is showing the most recent thing that I worked on that was just accepted for publication. And this is the habitat selection analysis that I was doing. After finding all these home ranges and seeing where a lot of birds were, I wanted to know why are they there. So this looked at what is at used locations and compared it to a bunch of random locations that I considered available to the bird. So in the left here, you've got all the red fixes, and this is aerial imagery that I classified. Gray is impervious surfaces like roads and houses. Green is grass. Dark green is trees. Blue is water. I use that to make different layers like percentage of water in an area, percent impervious surface. Top right is showing some aerial imagery, and the bottom right is showing LiDAR data of that area. And I process LiDAR data to get tree height. So it's light detection and ranging is what LiDAR stands for. They beam lasers down to get the height of everything. So if a point was in trees, I knew the height of the tree. Whether it was in a tree or not, I had a radius around the pixel showing percent tree cover within that area. And so this extracts the data from all those layers at every pixel where a used location is, then also an available location. And this would be like taking a dog into a house and putting treats and toys into every room with, different treats, different toys, and seeing what room does the dog keep going into. By comparing the used to available and seeing what the Greyhawks are using, then we're able to see what's important to them, what stuff are they selecting. The other thing that I'm hopefully wrapping up soon is species distribution modeling. So again, with the used locations, used a maximum entropy method to create these species distribution models. And this is a presence only thing. We're just all it uses is the presence locations, and it creates the widest probability distribution that it can that meets the environmental constraints uh, imposed by what the hawks are using at the used locations. And I did this for two groups of birds. On the left is unpaired individuals, which wandered around more. And then on the right are the birds that were paired and in a breeding territory. So another thing I could do with movement data, I'm working on demographic modeling also, but that doesn't use movement data. So the last thing that I'm currently working on is with the Arizona birds. Some of it is going to be more descriptive, where I'm looking at what route are they taking when they migrate, where are they going. But I'm also going to look at home range size for breeding home range, winter home range, and then most likely going to do some habitat selection with them as well. And this map is showing a female that's currently in Mexico for her second winter. And you can see the route that she's taken down and back and covering 950 kilometers to get down there to where she's going. So that was a lot. I tried to rush through it real quick to show quite a few different things that you can do with movement data. Got my email address down there, and I will remember to throw it in the chat, hopefully, and saved a few minutes for questions if anyone has some.
Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate it. So if anyone has other questions, please feel free to unmute and ask them, or you can write them in the chat and I'll read them out. I always have questions. Like I can listen to people talk all day long. So the gray hawks is the biggest threat to their populations, the habitat availability, or is there other threats as well?
I would say the largest is habitat loss. The lower Rio Grande Valley is a very rapidly developing area. It still is. And they keep losing stuff all the time. That one that had all the trees cleared. I mentioned that that little portion of the top that's been cleared, and that's just one example of a lot of hawks that I know of that have had most of the trees cleared out of their territories. And
And is there
there's
any protection for that, or is it just
no, no, they're a state listed species, have been since 1977, but
oh,
there's no monitoring going on. There's nothing going on for them. They just have been listed.
so you're in those two counties is sort of where you've been working. Is their distribution quite a bit larger, or is that kind of where they're
So they do go farther west up the river to Laredo, where I suspect all the way up to at least Laredo, they're year round. I've got a couple birds with transmitters up there. One of the transmitters, the battery failed, but the other one, he's staying there so far year round. When you get farther into West Texas, think that those birds are migratory. There's some in the Big Bend area. There's some in the Davis Mountains area, some other portions of West Texas. So they do have a limited distribution within the state. They're not a common raptor, so I think that's why they were listed. But that's all that was done is the listing.
okay? I have a question from the chat. Do adults ever disperse into northern areas? We had a couple show up in Laramie in November in 2024.
There is the occasional odd wanderer. I think they had one in part of California one year that was real weird. I think within the last year or two, they had one maybe in Nevada or somewhere. A few of them do go, but for the most part, they don't. One of the juveniles that I tracked, she came up. So I'm 2 hours north of the valley now, where I live, up kind of even with Corpus Christi, if anyone's familiar with that. One of the juveniles I tracked came up here to Alice, where I live, one day, was up here for an hour, hour and a half before she headed south. And that's the only one I've tracked this far north. Most of them, once they start to get just a little far north in the valley, they hit the brush country, which is a lot of grassland or a lot of real short mesquite trees. And if they hit that, they turn around and head south. So there is a potentially suitable area for them farther north from that if enough of them ever jump over that and stay and become established.
Is there a thought of ever trapping and redistributing? That's not the word, but you know what I mean. Like putting them there.
Like trans-relocating birds or something.
That's it.
No, I think all the state is doing is revisiting the listing and seeing if they should have been listed in the first place and just delisting them. They're not state listed in New Mexico or Arizona where they also occur.
Are those populations stable or are they declining as well?
Southern Arizona has a ton of them, and
Okay.
they think the population is growing. There's someone that did a study there that was published a few years ago that thinks that uh, that they're definitely expanding. New Mexico, they're finding some a little farther north. They don't have a ton of them in New Mexico, so that'll probably take longer for that to, I think, become a larger population that's really growing quite a bit. But I
Interesting.
mean,
Cool.
they're all over urban areas is one of the things I've found. So they seem very adaptable.
And what do they eat? So that do they, what do they eat? They can eat anything or?
Yeah, if you there have been some diet studies in Arizona. The bulk of it is reptiles from what they found. That's also why they think they're migratory in Arizona. Is southern Arizona is quite a bit farther north than southern Texas and gets quite a bit colder. So they think that it's the reptilian food supply really going away in the winter, and that's why they're leaving. Um, Someone did a study here in South Texas, finished up last year, and he found that birds in more natural areas, about half their diet is small mammals. The birds in urban areas, about half their diet is birds. So they're
Oh,
still eating other stuff, but they uh, they eat quite a bit. It's pretty varied. I think they're more like a red-shouldered hawk, or fairly generalist.
okay. Another question from the chat. For the natal dispersal experiments, why was the focus on females?
So the focus was not on females at the time I did that. That were that was all that I had that had survived and settled into breeding territories. Since then, there are two males that I've been tracking that have mates and their own breeding territories now, but at the time it was just them. And that's so natal dispersal. I guess if you're talking about natal dispersal, that's strictly dispersal from the natal area to when they're breeding. If you don't follow them all the way till they're breeding, then that's not natal dispersal. So what I looked at for the masters was just dispersing from the natal area. It wasn't natal dispersal. I had people that were, I learned about that because they were really nitpicky when I used it incorrectly.
That's how we learn lots of things. Uh, okay, there's no more other questions in the chat. Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask? Okay. Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you,
Thank
Victoria, for
you.
your time and sharing your research. It was very interesting. Greatly appreciate you joining us. I'm going to put my screen back on regarding the webinars, but I appreciate everybody's time for coming out here and listening. If you have any last minute questions, you can sneak them into the chat. But once again, these webinars are supporting our small grants program. So if you can donate anything at all, that would be greatly appreciated. And I hope you can join us next month, February 11th, for a WRP workshop. Please bring your questions and we'll answer those. And otherwise, I hope you all have a great evening.